Welcome. This is James Corbett of the Corbett Report with your eye-opener report for BoilingFrogsPost.com. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence announced last month that America's civilian intelligence agencies appropriated a combined $54.6 billion for classified operations this year. The admission came in the form of a blithe news release, which noted only the total figure and explicitly refused to provide any details of how the figure was divided up between America's 16 non-uniformed intelligence agencies or what the money was appropriated for. Any and all subsidiary information concerning the NIP budget, whether the information concerns particular intelligence agencies or particular intelligence programs, will not be disclosed, DNI James Clapper wrote in the press release, citing the fact that such a disclosure would jeopardize national security. What has often been called into question is the functioning of the oversights that are supposed to exist to ensure that such monies are not misappropriated or used for illegal or immoral activities. What is not called into question nearly as often, however, is how we can trust those figures at all to come to a true understanding of the amount of money at the disposal of these covert agencies. The amount of funds that the CIA has to use for its so-called black operations, or covert actions, for example, is not a question for idle speculation. As we saw in the Iran-Contra scandal, the CIA can hide behind its own officially sanctioned secrecy to commit illegal actions in order to fund other illegal operations. So what then is the size of the CIA's budget, and where is this money parked? The question is even more difficult to answer than it first appears. Not only is there the issue of the funds that they receive in secret from the Congress, and not only is there the ever-present question of how black operations use illegal methods to finance further illegal covert operations, there is also the question of the CIA literally setting up businesses, front companies, and shells that function from the outside like any other business. Behind the scenes, however, these businesses are merely a place for the CIA to nest its covert operatives and, potentially, to make and funnel money for their own purposes. Perhaps the best-known example of this is Air America, which the CIA set up to run heroin out of Laos for its military accomplices in the region.
Opium and heroin had always been grown and produced in Laos, but the CIA made it much easier for the tribesmen. Not only did the CIA let them carry on producing heroin, they also made it much easier for them. They set up an airline, Air America, which was used to transport the drugs into neighboring countries, including Vietnam.
I was a freelance journalist and I went to Laos to do this story on the source of the heroin and opium that was flooding into South Vietnam. And I was interviewing opium farmers. How much did you produce last year? What did you do with it? And the answers were always the same. We got about 5, maybe 10 kilos. At the end of harvest, we went down to that landing pad. An American helicopter came in, paid us cash for the opium, loaded the opium on the helicopter, and flew away.
In recent years, the CIA has again become embroiled in a scandal involving its ownership of airline front companies, which were used to cover its role in covert and highly illegal operations.
Tell us about the torture taxi. Why did you call it that?
Because basically the CIA has created this whole network, this whole fleet of planes to ferry terrorism suspects to dungeons around the world and to hold them indefinitely. And we thought part of the story that people weren't really looking at was the actual vehicles. The planes, many of the planes fly out of a rural airfield in Smithfield, North Carolina that a CIA front company set up years and years ago after the Vietnam War, after the Church Commission hearings, and is basically a perfect place to fly secret operations out of because it's isolated, it's small, and people don't really pay a ton of attention to what's going on there.
Trevor Paglin, what's this company called?
The name of the company is Aero Contractors out of Smithfield, North Carolina.
Is this the same company that ran Air America during Vietnam, and can you explain what that is?
You know, Air America was the sort of Vietnam-era covert airline of the CIA that was directly controlled by the CIA and run by the CIA. And after Vietnam, basically the CIA moved out of the airline business just a little bit, and it relinquished a little bit of control. But they asked an Air America pilot, a guy who'd worked for them for many years and retired, hey, can you set up a new airline for us? And we'll help you set it up. You can run it. We'll give you contracts. You can fly our guys, but it'll be your little baby. And his name was Jim Ryan, and his company was Aero Contractors out of North Carolina.
Worryingly, given the documented history of CIA involvement in such illegal activities, the agency has also been active in setting up front companies in the nuclear technology industry, ostensibly to monitor and disrupt nuclear smuggling networks. But given the monumental failure of such admitted CIA fronts as Brewster Jennings in the case of the AQ-Con network, what faith can the public have that these companies, too, are not being used to in fact foster the proliferation of the weapons they are ostensibly seeking to control? Perhaps the most worrying of all, the agency has had to admit in recent years that they have invested hundreds of millions of dollars setting up at least a dozen companies since the 9/11 attacks to monitor terrorist groups and weapon proliferation networks. The disclosure comes because the agency supposedly had to shut down all but 2 of the companies because they proved to be incapable of stopping or disrupting the terrorist networks at all. Egregious as all of these activities undoubtedly are, and as contrary as they may be to the very founding principles of a supposedly democratic republic, they have been well documented and exposed in the past. Much less examined, however, is the CIA's connections to the murky world of money laundering and the shady financial institutions that have undergirded its operations and made the funding of the types of illegal activities it routinely engages in feasible.
When the Nugan Hand Bank of Sydney, Australia collapsed in 1980, it appeared at first glance to be just another bank failure. But after Australian authorities began taking a closer look, they discovered a tangled web of intrigue with all the elements of a best-selling spy novel: a mysterious death, the body later dug up from its grave, illegal currency transactions, big-time drug operations, and the Central Intelligence Agency.
The idea was that money would be deposited with the Nugan Hand Bank by the CIA through various channels, and also that the Nugan Hand Bank would be the repository for funds coming in from various CIA enterprises, namely drugs in Thailand, marijuana in particular, and that the Nugan Hand Bank would then be responsible for rerouting that money to an account in America with a New York bank.
Nugan Hand was not your ordinary bank. There were secret numbered accounts, and hardly any of its top people were bankers. Many were American civilians and former high-ranking military officers with ties to U.S. intelligence. When they found the body of Australian businessman Frank Nugan, the bank's chairman, shot to death a few months before the bank went under, they discovered in his pocket the business card of this man, William Colby, former director of the CIA. Nugan's partner was Michael Hand, an American Green Beret who served 2 tours in Vietnam, one of them for the Central Intelligence Agency. He disappeared a short while after the bank collapsed and is now believed to be dead.
In the light of all of this information, hard questions need to be asked. What percentage of the economy is in fact run by the intelligence agencies? What industries are they involved in? Under what circumstances, if any, can they ever be compelled to disclose their true nature? And what hope does the public have to secure accountability from intelligence agencies if those very agencies are able to use shell businesses, front companies, and even dummy banks to generate revenue and launder illegally acquired funds? These questions are not idle speculation. They in fact expose the black heart of the murky world of the intelligence operations, national security classifications, and need-to-know information that are the very basis of the intelligence community. However, these questions are almost impossible to answer in the current political environment. Numerous lists of varying names have been compiled over the years purporting to name suspected CIA front companies, but by the very nature of the laws that allow the CIA to set up these companies and conduct their operations under the cover of national security, most of these lists remain just that: allegations. And ultimately, perhaps that is the point. To ask if this or that particular company is or is not a CIA front, or may be being used by intelligence officials as a cover for its own purposes, is to risk losing sight of the fundamental question. Should secretive, unaccountable organizations like the CIA or any other agency supposedly under the purview of the government, which is supposedly by and for the people, be allowed to operate freely and secretly in the public sector? How can a public that has no way of participating in the oversight of these agencies trust that powers like this will always and only be used for good, and that these powers cannot and will not be used by criminals in positions of power? And given the documented history of CIA abuses of power, lies, and outright illegal participation in drug running, arms trafficking, money laundering, and torture, why should they? This video is brought to you by the subscribers of BoilingFrogsPost.com. For more information on this and other topics, please go to BoilingFrogsPost.com. For more information and commentary from James Corbett, please go to CorbettReport.com.